Fabulous cousin. My name is Christopher Keshishian. I'm a second-year medical student at the VCU School of Medicine. Just a couple things about me and my journey to medical school. So I went to Glendale Community College to start off. Went there for 3 years because I was kind of indecisive about what I wanted to do at first and wasn't sure where I really wanted to go to after college. But once I decided that I kind of wanted to do medical school and kind of committed myself to doing all of like the typical pre-med classes, I was able to get on my way to UCLA. I graduated from UCLA in 2018 and then took 3 gap years after college, half by choice, half not, as you guys will hear about a little bit. But that's just a little bit about me. Today, I just kind of want to talk about some of the things that I wish I knew when I was in your guys' position about being a pre-med, applying to medical school, actually being a medical student and what that means and what your schedule kind of is on a day-to-day basis and what you're signing yourself up for. So we're just going to go as like a couple time points. We're going to start off as what I wish I knew as a pre-med while I was in undergrad, and then kind of what I wish I knew as I was going into my application cycle, and then what I wish I knew going into medical school itself. So these are just a couple bullet points that I've put up there, but I kind of want to talk about my experience while I was in undergrad and what I kind of did as a pre-medical student. So during my time in undergrad, I did some research at the community college level with, if any of you went to GC, Miss O, the OChem professor, I did some research with her over a winter and a summer, accumulated a bunch of hours like that, did the usual volunteering and things like that when I was at UCLA, at the UCLA hospital. Really, outside of that, didn't do much other extracurricular stuff. Most of my time I spent was kind of doing all my classwork, making sure I was getting good grades, and then studying for the MCAT and all those kinds of things. But some of the things I wish I knew as an undergrad is that as important as your coursework and your exam work is, everything else is just as equally as important. Your application to medical school is not just your statistics, it's not just your GPA, and it's not just your MCAT. And I could tell you guys that firsthand. When I applied, I've applied 2 times to medical school. The first time I applied, I had great statistics, a top 5% MCAT score, 3.9 plus GPA. But my entire first cycle applying to medical school, I only got 1 interview at USC, and that was it. And I think a lot of it was that up to that point, I hadn't been prioritizing a lot of the things that I was doing outside of the classroom. And I was just kind of focused on what I was doing in the class, trying to make sure my grades were good and my exam scores were good. Because all I ever heard from other physicians that I shadowed, physicians I worked with when I was scribing and shadowing and things like that, was that your stats are everything, your grades are the most important, blah, 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 this and that. And I could tell you guys that's not true anymore. A lot of the older physicians that you guys will encounter, some of the more experienced attending physicians who have been practicing for 20 plus years, they're really disconnected from the process of getting into medical school now. And the competition today is a lot different than the competition that they were going up against trying to get into medical school. So be sure to prioritize in your undergrad studies things like doing research, volunteer work, leadership positions in organizations, and just maintaining a work-life balance. Make sure you're actually enjoying your life too while you're doing all of this. I know pre-medical students and pre-health students, we all have like this intrinsic capability to be some of the most neurotic people of all time. But at the end of the day, please make sure you're taking care of yourself too while you're trying to do all of this. And then I also wish I knew that not all of these opportunities are created equally. You could get a bunch of volunteering on paper to build up tons of hours, but the reality is that sometimes some volunteering positions are much more meaningful when it comes to your application time than other volunteering opportunities. Some effort going into research isn't the same as putting all your effort and getting publications and things like that in a more productive lab with a more productive PI. So not every opportunity is created equally. Not that any of them are bad opportunities, like any experience is good experience, but try to find stuff that is more meaningful to you and that will make you a better applicant. And also try to find a mentor. One of the things that really sucks about being a pre-medical student is no one tells you anything about how to be a pre-medical student. No one tells you like what to, you kind of know that you have to do some volunteering and some research, but that's about it. No one really guides you through the process. No one helps you select good volunteering positions, meaningful, impactful volunteering positions that you get to actually do a lot of stuff that will show favorably when it comes time to apply. There aren't people there to help you, guide you towards opportunities that kind of fit your narrative and why you want to go into medicine, which is a huge part of the application cycle that we'll talk about a little bit later. And most of all, there's a lot of people that don't tell you how to apply, what being a physician is really like, what being a med student is really like. So I'd say try to find a mentor as early as you can to kind of guide you through the process. Some mentors could be attending physicians, residents, medical students. I'd say the lower down the chain of command they are, the better they probably are as a mentor, because they're more likely to have been doing these same things more recently than, let's say, the attending physician who's been practicing for 25 years. They're not nearly as connected to the application cycle as like a first-year medical student that's just starting up school, you know? Those are people that just went through what you want to go through, and they're the ones that are going to be able to best provide you like up-to-date critiques and tips and things like that of how to get along this journey. So let's talk about some of the experiences. Like I said, there's no such thing as a bad experience, so I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to get any type of experience. Like if you could find an opportunity that you could become involved in, you could make the most of anything. Some things that are kind of considered cookie cutter experiences, which are still great. They still get you into medicine, experiencing medicine, and they'll really be able to guide your decision to actually pursue a career in medicine. But these are things that a lot of people do, and this includes things like scribing, which I did. Most like general volunteering opportunities where you don't, like those positions that I'm thinking of, that you're in a hospital and you don't really have an assigned role. You're just kind of doing a little bit of everything and not really getting too involved with one thing specifically. And then just like low levels of research involvement that people do is kind of like checking a box. Those are like kind of cookie cutter things that most pre-medical students are going to be doing to try to get into med school. Some of the things that are going to make you stand out in your applications are things like starting organizations with missions you're passionate about, such as this organization, the club that you guys are coming to this meeting through. Someone started this at some point to bring together a bunch of Armenian pre-medical students to kind of help us find a common goal and a common pathway of trying to get into medical school and supporting each other. Things like this are an amazing experience. Getting involved with leadership positions in clubs like these show that you're really able to kind of coordinate people and demonstrate your leadership skills when it comes to the application. Other unique skills like being a college athlete, having any level of high music skills, anything essentially where you're being competitive or teamwork is involved is amazing, because it, as cheesy as it sounds, being in a, let's say like my brother played basketball and went to Armenia to play in the home and Netmen games. Playing in a team environment like that, where you're going to another country or doing something like that, shows a high level of teamwork that really translates into the medical setting. And that's kind of the things that they're looking for in their applicants. So being able to show those kinds of qualities is always important. And especially things with competition, things that show that you're striving to be as good as you can in something. They're looking for passion like that in your activities. And then we talked about low level research involvement just as like a box ticking kind of thing. High level research involvement could open so many doors for you as an applicant. Essentially all of the top 20 schools in the nation, many of which are the California schools, your UCLAs, San Diego, UCSF, Stanford, all of these schools are top research facilities. And one of their big things is finding students that are really involved with research. So finding a PI at your school that you could work with and going in on the first day and saying like, hey, what I want to get out of this experience is to help you with your research, but I also want to make sure that I'm a productive research student, getting publications, getting abstracts, getting your names on things, going to conferences. That kind of commitment to research is super important when it comes to especially those really competitive schools in the nation, because your stats will take you only so far. And then at some point, you kind of have to start fitting the needs of some of the schools at the top, and the needs that they're looking for most of the time are research abilities. And then, like we talked about, volunteering in the hospital, those tasks where you don't really have one set goal. An important way to get involved in volunteering is stuff that is aimed at helping solve medical and socioeconomic discrepancies in the community. Some of the things that I could think of are like working or like volunteering in free clinics. I know like there's a free clinic in Glendale that I only found after looking for a bit that's open a few times a month or something. But going into somewhere like that where you're helping provide care for people who don't have insurance, people who wouldn't be seen by a healthcare provider if it weren't for you and the physicians and nurses there volunteering your time. Those kinds of things will go a long way to make you stand out in your application, because it's really something that most people aren't going to be going out of their way to do. A lot of people, like I'm saying, don't get the guidance to help push them towards these kinds of opportunities. You kind of just know that you should volunteer as a pre-medical student. So you might be looking at things where you're not as involved or you don't have set responsibilities that you're pertaining to. And then anything else experience-wise that fits your narrative of why you're going to med school is going to help you tremendously. And then we'll talk a little bit more about this narrative later on when we get to the app cycle. So just a little bit more about your experiences as like a heads up for when it does come to application time. So when you apply for MD schools, they allow you to choose 15 of your experiences to list. A lot of people don't get to the 15, so don't feel like you need to have 15 different experiences to put on. Most people don't. I had, I think, like 10 or 11 experiences when I applied the second time. And then DO schools let you list unlimited amounts of experiences, but at some point, quality is more important than quantity, and showing commitment to a few things over a couple years, showing lots of hours put into an organization, really helping focus on one cause. That's like what's important when it comes to these experiences. And then on your MD applications, I don't think this applies to DO, I can't remember, but on your MD applications, you identify 3 of your experiences as most important experiences. Those are most significant. I forget the exact wording. These experiences, once you click that box, you're going to get greeted with another box that opens up that lets you write even more about that experience. You get to write twice as much as any of the other experiences. So those are really the ones that are going to be the impactful ones, the ones that really helped you decide why you want to go into med school, or the ones that really left lasting impressions on you. I know people that wrote about things that had nothing to do with medicine, but it was really things that were foundational experiences for them as people. So anything like that, things that really stick out as important to you, those are going to be your most important experiences on your app. So then we get to the application cycle. The application cycle was the part of the med student journey that I was most lost in. I don't think anyone at any point ever prepped me for what the application cycle was like. It's the longest year of your life, and there's a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of details to nail down in your applications. So what happens is you get to write a personal statement, and the personal statement is simply an answer of why do you want to pursue a career in medicine? And you have to answer in about 5,000 characters, why so. Your personal statement is going to include experiences from your personal life, problems that you've dealt with, health problems that you might have dealt with yourself, family member health issues, things that really guided your personal reasons for going into med school, and then how all of these experiences that you've been gathering as a pre-medical student have been kind of feeding in, fueling that desire, and really guiding you towards this path in medicine and what you're going to carry from those on. Then you get to fill out all the info about those 15 or so experiences. You get to do your 3 most important experiences. And then after you submit that, what happens is that's all part of your primary application. And once your primary application gets sent out, you get secondary applications from every school. It's crazy, but you will just be writing essays upon essays upon essays for like 3 months straight, filling out dozens and dozens of secondary applications from schools. So it's really important to kind of be aware of what you're getting yourself into with that cycle, with the application cycle. Because the first time I did that, I found out that secondary applications were a thing like a month before applying. I was not prepared for the fact that I was going to be writing essays like that for months on end. So it's really important to kind of get ready for that. And one of the ways you could get ready is to start writing your essays early. I've started recommending people, if you think you're applying that year, you should start writing your personal statement as early as January. Why January? Because your personal statement is like the single most important thing on your application. Your personal statement is either going to make you or it's going to break you. No matter how good your stats are, if you turn in a bad personal statement, you will not get into medical school anywhere. So what you want to do is start writing your personal statement early, because it gives you time to think through things that you're going to write about. You could write the longest personal statement ever in January and then kind of just fine tune it as you're going up till the May timeframe when the application actually opens up. That gives you 4 months of editing your essays. It gives you 4 months to really refine your details. And it really gets you thinking about what you want to include in that personal statement. And then you want to submit your primary application early. The first day it opens up is, I think, either the last day of May or the first day of June. You want to submit your application as early as possible, because they then process those applications in a rolling order. Whoever submits first gets processed first. And then those applications, based on the order they're processed, are sent out to all of the schools. And then the order that those schools get those applications, they're going to send the secondary applications out. You get about a month of downtime after you send your primary application to when you get your secondary applications. And my second time around applying, this is when I started writing my secondary applications. You might wonder, like, how do you write your secondary applications if you haven't gotten them yet? But most of the schools don't change their essays from year to year. And if they do, they might change 1 or 2 of the essays. Most schools will have you write like 3 to 4 different short essays. So you could start pre-writing those essays and some of the really common ones, like what's a challenge that you face during your journey through medicine, how would you contribute to diversity at the school, things like that. Those common types of questions, you could start answering those early and really start formulating those thoughts so that you're ready once secondary time comes. I would say start off with, like, you could Google and find common med school secondary questions, write all of those, and then you could start Googling each school one by one, finding their secondary questions from the application cycle before, and then start writing those out and just start editing them for that month. There's a lot of different resources online to use too that I haven't listed here that I forgot to. But if you go on Reddit, the medical school subreddit, they have a chat room called Essays or something like that, where pre-medical students that are applying swap essays with each other and edit each other's essays. So that's a great way to get a second eye on all of your writing. I got every single one of my essays, the second application, read by someone in that subreddit, and all of their edits were extremely helpful. And you get to swap and be like, hey, it's for this school, it's this character limit, can you help me out with it? And people are really willing to, because you then return the favor for them. So timing of your application, pre-write your essays, those are things that are going to help you stay on top, because once those secondaries start rolling in, you'll know when your primary application gets processed, because the day it gets processed, 15 secondary applications will just hit your inbox just like that automatically. Like, you will get that email saying it was processed, and then you can watch the time mark of, like, within the first 10 minutes, like, schools will already be sending you secondaries. So you really want to be staying ahead of it so you don't get drowned by the amount of writing you'll have to do. And then once you do your secondaries and you send all those out and you hopefully start getting interviews, it's important to be authentic on your interview day. There's a lot of people that, I mean, especially when I interviewed the first time and it was in person, some of the characters you meet on the interview trail are kind of iffy. People are trying to make themselves look better on interview day than other people. The kind of like gunner mentality of like hyper competitiveness can come out of some people. Just be authentic on interview day. The interview day is essentially, they want to see if the person they imagined when reading your essays is the person you actually are. So if you can be as close to who you are when you're writing, that's what they're looking for. They're just trying to make sure you are that person and it wasn't just a facade that you're putting up and that you're not too good to be true. If a school is interviewing you, that means they're willing to accept you as a medical student. Your app is perfectly fine for them as a medical student. They're just making sure that you're a normal person at that point. And then, like I was saying before, your narrative is like the most important thing, and this ties into your personal statement. Most people apply, every single person applies to medical school because at some level they like science and they want to help people. The schools don't want to hear that because they know that. They want to see, why is it important to you? Okay. Let's go to this next slide. They want to see why you want to be a physician, not because you like science and want to help people, but really why. What is it in your experiences that has pushed you towards wanting to become a physician? Every single person has a unique application. No one on the planet, no matter how similar your experiences on paper are, no one has had the same path to medical school. So they really want to know what was your path and why is it that you chose to be a doctor? And then how have you applied yourself to help others and learn about life as a physician? A lot of people will think of just the how you applied yourself to help others, you know, the volunteering and things like that. But shadowing, scribing, these kinds of things that really put you next to a physician and seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day basis are insanely important during your application, because a school doesn't want to admit you if you have no idea what you're really getting yourself into, what your day-to-day life is going to be as a physician. And you really only get to see that when you're doing shadowing and things like that, where you're really following the physician around and seeing everything they do. And then importantly, what do you plan on carrying from these important experiences that you list on your application into your time in medical school and into your career? I'll tell you guys, the second time around I applied, when I first applied to medical school, one of the things that really drove me to become a doctor was that I was really interested in cardiovascular health and especially preventative health. So living in Glendale, Glendale's considered the heart disease capital of Southern California, believe it or not. A lot of the times you see people growing up with diseases that you really shouldn't be developing until way down the line. So my interest in that was one of the things that first pushed me to pursuing a career in medicine. You know, how can we optimize people's health and prevent these diseases that are being burdens to our community? And my second time around, that's what I focused my application on. I wrote about my time shadowing a cardiologist and seeing all the patients he dealt with. I wrote about my time in the ER as a scribe. And the thing is, you have to put a twist to make them fit your narrative. I didn't write about how I was a scribe and what I did as a scribe. I wrote about working in the ER and seeing the consequences of these chronic diseases, of heart disease, diabetes, cerebrovascular disease, all these things. The final stages of what those diseases brought people to was what I saw in the ER. So I wrote about that and not my day-to-day typing as a scribe. You know, you have to put that spin on the narrative. And then I wrote about other volunteering experiences that I did, such as working as a health and nutrition coach at a elementary school, things like that, that really tied it together, that what I was thinking, why I wanted to become a physician was to prevent disease, learn more about these chronic diseases and how they affect our communities. And your narrative is way more important than your statistics. You will see, like, there are people who have MCAT scores that most people would be ashamed of. Not that it's important, it does not define you as a person, but people might see a score and be like, I won't get into medical school. But if you can show in your narrative that you really want to be a physician, you have a clear reason why, and you've taken the steps to demonstrate that and show your commitment to getting into medical school, that could take you farther than your score can sometimes. And then once you've done all this application process, you've jumped through all the hoops, you get to medical school. And going into medical school, I had no idea what to expect. It was only until like few months leading into medical school that I really finally understood how medical school worked. So just to like shine some light on that, so you know what you're getting yourself into. Medical school traditionally is a 4-year schedule. Now, how those 4 years play out is kind of dependent on school to school. There are some schools that have really unique schedules, like UCLA and Duke. UCLA even more recently, they transitioned to having a mandatory research year during medical school. So the way UCLA works, from my understanding, is that you will do about a year-ish of preclinical work, which is where you're learning your like biochem, you're learning about all the diseases, you're taking your system-based, like you're learning about cardiovascular disease, all that stuff. They'll try to squeeze that into 1 year, and then you do a research year, and then you do your clinical rotations where you're actually working in the hospital. Most schools in the US will do 2 preclinical years. So you spend, like, let's say half that time learning your basic sciences like genetics, biochem, all that stuff. And then another year you spend learning your foundational health sciences, learning like oncology, all about cancer. You're learning some of the dermatology stuff, cardiovascular, all the basis of the disease that you guys need to know, you learn during those first 2 years. And then once you're done with that, you go into 1 year of rotating the hospital in core disciplines. This is like internal medicine, family medicine, surgery, OB-GYN, kind of like the bases of the medical system. You spend a year rotating through every single one of them. You get tested at the end of each of those rotations on knowledge you learned and your ability to perform the exams and interviews that you learned during those times. And you essentially just get exposed to everything medicine your 3rd year. Your 4th year, most of the time, is completely customizable, and you can really schedule it to fit your needs. You could take 2 months of vacation time, just a bunch of electives that you could do. The electives will range from things like autopsy labs, where you get to do autopsies on deceased patients, all the way to doing more rotations in the hospital and specialties that you're considering. And you can even do things like away rotations, which are basically audition rotations at different hospitals and medical schools, where you think you might be wanting to go for residency. You basically go there, do a 4 to 6 week rotation, and they get to know you as a student and what you're capable of. So once it comes time to applying for residency, they kind of have a known commodity with you. And medical school, none of the exams end, and they won't end for a long, long time, even into your practicing career. So right now I take a final examination for each of my classes, and each class in medical school, you usually take like 1 block at a time. So you'll focus all of your attention on one subject for 2 weeks at a time, 2 to 3 weeks, up to like I've had 4-week blocks. And then you take a final exam at the end of that. Then you repeat it starting the next day. You start up your next block, 2 to 3 weeks, final. It's a very rapid pace like that. And you kind of have to keep up with all of the information you're learning. You kind of have to continuously review it, because at the end of your preclinical years, you're going to take the step 1 exam, which is a test that's like a cumulative test about everything you've learned in your first 2 years of medical school. Every school in the nation, or essentially every school in the nation, is going to give you a dedicated study time anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks, where you have no classes at all and your only job is to study for step 1. Even with those 4 to 8 weeks, you will not be able to study for step 1 unless you're keeping up with all the material that you've learning, at least a little bit as you're going through medical school, especially because all of these diseases and things you're learning, they're not confined to one part of the body. They're involving everything. Like your heart diseases are connected to everything else in your body. So you kind of have to just keep studying them over and over again to fit into the different blocks that you're going into. So you take step one at the end of your preclinical years. This used to be the most important examination you took as a medical student, because your score on this essentially decided what residencies you were competitive for. But 2 years ago, they decided to make step one a pass-fail exam. Now step two, you take at the end of your third year, and it's essentially like step one, but they cut out all of like the little minute details about biochem and the pathways and things like that. And they really focus in on just the clinically important things that you learn during third year for all of that information from step one. Step two is generally considered an easier exam because you've already been tested on all of that material a year ago. And then you spend 1 year in the hospital applying all of that information clinically before you take step two. Most people think that step two is now going to become the gold standard for residency scores, and that making step one pass fail is just going to shift that importance of the exam to step two instead. But no classes have applied yet having the pass fail step one, so it's really up in the air, but that's like the most common belief. And then step three is that you have to take at some point before you start residency. From what I've heard, no one fails step three. It's essentially just a walk in the park. At that point, you've spent 2 years doing everything in the hospital, and the stuff they test you on is just the everyday stuff that you're seeing, so it's not really a stress. So what does my typical day as a second-year student look like? I'm a little different in most, that I'm kind of like a morning person. I like to get my stuff done early so I could kind of get on with my day a little bit later. So usually I'll wake up at 6 a.m. and then I like to in the morning start reviewing the material for those board exams. Like step one, I'm taking in like 2 months time, less than 2 months now, which is kind of scary. But I start reviewing that stuff early in the morning, so I know I do it and get it out of the way before I start studying for my current block. I'll take a break at some point to watch after myself and actually go work out, because you wouldn't be surprised. Medical school is a busy time, so a lot of people let little habits in their life, like working out, cooking for themselves, things like that, slip by. But it's pretty important to keep those things up to keep you sane. Like all your little daily habits and the things that keep you going, you want to keep those up in medical school. So I make time for that too. And then I'll get back from the gym, do some practice problems, review anything else I want. And then usually after 5 is just kind of like my whatever time. I just do whatever I want. Sometimes I wrote research here. Like sometimes I'll work on research projects. I'll hang out with my girlfriend. I'll hang out with friends. I'll go out to a restaurant or something like that. Just a little bit of time to myself before the end of the day, so I could go to bed with a clear mind and not thinking about school at all times. And it does vary from person to person. There's still people in my class that do the whole wait until like 2 days before the exam and start cramming everything, which is insane to me, because we get upwards of like 1,000 slides worth of lecture material a week. But you still see that in medical school, so it really varies from person to person. Most people will tell you that you're going to spend on average somewhere between like 4 to 8 hours studying a day in medical school, which is, I think, pretty average in that time range. And then what is studying like in medical school? Because there's a ton of information to learn, and sometimes it seems daunting. I'm not going to lie. Like sometimes you get out of a lecture and you're like, how am I supposed to learn that all when the test is in like 2 days? But something that is kind of cool in medical school is most companies know that you're struggling to study like that. So there's a lot more resources for you to learn at your disposal. So you have your lecture slides, and then you have these third-party resources, which is what I mostly use to study. Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, Sketchy. Sketchy is especially fun because it's like, essentially, if you guys have ever heard of learning palaces, it's where you tie information that you're learning to a specific place or image or something like that. Sketchy is essentially like they're drawing a cartoon that you're watching, and as they draw the cartoon, they're dropping in info. So like let's say a certain bacteria is treated with penicillin, they'll draw in a pencil somewhere, like the penicillin pencil. So you could think back to the picture and remember what you saw in the picture, and it helps you remember the information like that. Boards and Beyond, Pathoma, it's just 2 physicians that started those companies. They go over all the board relevant material that you need to know, and they have like nice succinct lectures that are like way shorter than your actual med school lectures, and just teach you the most important things that you need to know for your board exams. If anyone uses Anki for studying for the MCAT or anything like that, you'll see that Anki becomes even more important and widely used in medical school. Most people will use it. There's especially this deck called the Anki deck, which has like basically all the information you need to know for your step exams. And people, especially me, will just crank out cards every single day. Like I think today I did 1,050 flashcards or something like that. And then UWorld, like most of you will probably use for studying for the MCAT, is even more important in medical school. Essentially, everyone uses UWorld. It's like the gold standard of studying. And it's like a 3,700 question bank for step one. And most people finish it once, if not twice, before taking step one to like be really prepared. And then with all of the studying that's going on every single day, how do you fit in extracurriculars into med school? Volunteering becomes way more sparse in med school. People still definitely volunteer, but it's not going to be anywhere near as much as you're doing as a pre-medical student. Like in pre-med, I remember weeks where I would volunteer up to like 16 hours a week, just going in multiple shifts. Volunteering in med school is more like every few weeks, you might go in for a few hours or something like that. If you even do. A lot of people don't do any volunteering in med school. Some people their volunteering will be working in student-run clinics. These are super cool because you get to help underserved populations, people that, like I said earlier, in the free clinics, they're not going to be able to see someone and get medical care unless they come to these student-run clinics, which are essentially like a couple of attending physicians will volunteer their time to see these patients, and you as students get to go see the patients with them and kind of learn ahead of your rotations and start working through the process of doing your interview with the patient, examining them, coming up with potential diagnoses and talking them through with the physician. It's essentially a great way to train while you're still in your preclinical years and kind of get a head start on the clinical experience. Then there's obviously research. Research becomes pretty important in medical school, especially if you want to go for a competitive specialty, like something surgical. A lot of the surgical subspecialties, plastics, neuro, orthopedics, a lot of them are super competitive. And one of the metrics that they stratify their students, their applicants based off of is research. Here in med school, getting like publications and things becomes way more important. Doing research and not having any productivity is almost like looked down upon. I don't know why, but sometimes you just don't get something out of research. But a lot of people will start doing less like basic science research in an actual lab and more like clinical research where you're going into work with patients in the clinic, or people will do what's called retrospective research, where they do like chart analysis, things like that. That's super easy to pump out. I want to point out that a lot of people get scared about being pre-meds and not having research experience going into med school. It's really not necessary to get any research experience while you are in med school. I came in with like very little research experience. All I had was the time I had in my OChem lab in community college. And that was like years back before I ever started med school. But I've had like no problem getting research here. The attendings and PhDs, anyone conducting research is way more willing to give you spots on projects as a medical student, because you're kind of like a more known commodity to them, and they know you kind of need to stick around with them and be productive with them. So it's way easier to actually access research and things like that. There's also student interest groups that just kind of expose you to all the specialties, because it seems overwhelming to learn about all of them. But interest groups will kind of have like, it's kind of like organizations like the Pre-Health Society you guys are in now. They'll have events with speakers, usually attending physicians or residents or things like that, who will come in and talk about their specialty or specific topics within the specialty. And literally anything else you want to make happen in med school, you can make happen as an extracurricular. We recently had a man come in and talk about like a tragic accident that his wife had when she gave birth and how she passed away. And he started an organization called Birth in Color. And a lot of the first-year medical students in our school actually started a chapter for Birth in Color at our school after hearing his talk. So anything you want to put your mind to, you kind of can make happen in medical school, because it might be hard to find people to support you to do it as a pre-med. which shouldn't discourage you. You should still try to get whatever you want done. But in med school, all these attendings are a lot more willing to help out the medical students. They're a lot more willing to help point you in the right directions and even serve as like kind of supervising faculty for you. Really, that's like mostly it. I just kind of wanted to touch on those 3 different time points because those were the ones that I struggled with going into medicine, where I had the least guidance. I had no idea what I should have done as a pre-med while I was in undergrad. I had no idea what I was doing going into the application cycle and wish someone told me what to do. And going into med school, I really didn't know what I was actually signing up for on a day-to-day basis. So it's kind of nice to know that ahead of time. So I just kind of want to open up the floor to like any questions you guys could have. I know you guys probably range everywhere from like in school to out of school and gap years, or maybe even applying this upcoming cycle. So any questions, like anything you guys want to ask away.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm applying for this next upcoming cycle, and I was wondering if it's worth getting a clinical experience, a clinical job in around January, considering that my application's due in a couple months. Is it worth it, or is it too late to look for a clinical experience?
There's no like too late. Any clinical experience is good because it gets you in there and you kind of get that idea of a day-to-day life as a physician. So I would say it's never too late. Obviously, the longer you are with a job or a position or anything like that, it kind of shows like loyalty and commitment to it. But no one's gonna say that you didn't do it for long enough. Like getting that experience is more important than how long you did it, you know?
What's like your biggest recommendation on studying for the MCAT?
Studying for the MCAT, I'd say definitely figure out what kind of studier you are. There are a lot of people that like to do the whole like study over the summer technique. You know, you have time off from school, you have 3 months of dedicated time. I will say, like, I tried doing that at first, and I'm the type of student that likes to study a little bit ahead of time and not like do a bunch all at once because it kind of burns me out. So doing it over the summer was a little bit too much for me because I was studying like upwards of like 8 hours a day and watching my friends over the summer live their lives, and I couldn't. So I switched over to studying for like 6 months over the school year and just doing little bits every single day. So the first important thing is to like find what study style suits you best. Don't try to force yourself into a time frame that doesn't suit you. And then second off, it's practice, practice, practice. The MCAT is way different than any other exam that you're ever going to take. Like the step 1 exam is more so testing the material that you learned and your understanding of it. The MCAT is almost like you have to have an like understanding of the material and then be able to do all the reading comprehension with the passages and things like that. And all that really comes with practice problems and doing them over and over again. There's lots of practice tests to do. You get free practice tests with the study books, like through Kaplan and things like that. You could buy extra practice tests. The AAMC has their own practice tests that are like most reflective of the actual exam. And I'd say just get your hands on as many of those problems and like UWorld problems and things like that as you can.
I have a question. How early did you start studying for your MCAT, or how early do you recommend starting to study for your MCAT?
Again, that kind of just like depends on the person. I would say definitely like in terms of timeline of when during your like journey to applying to do it, there are like some considerations to take You want to take the MCAT after you've taken essentially all the core subjects that it tests. So you have your like psych, soc, biochem, bio, chem, ochem, physics. You want to get through most of those subjects before you take the MCAT so that you have a basis in it before you start studying. I will say I never took psych or soc at like any point in college. And like that stuff's more doable of like learning on your own for the MCAT. But like those hard sciences, I would definitely wait until you've like learned all those hard sciences. Then in terms of timing your test, in terms of like in relation to when you're going to apply, take the test most importantly when you're ready for the exam. But then also consider that your test score does unfortunately expire, and the expiration date is dependent on like school to school. Most schools will do like the test has to be within 3 years of like you applying, of the year you apply. But there are some schools like UCLA I couldn't apply to my second time around because they have a special rule where your test has to be valid within 3 years of the day you would start medical school. So like it's really like 2 years to the day that you apply essentially, because the application cycle is a year long. So my test technically expired by the time that I would start school at UCLA if I did. So they wouldn't have accepted my score. So I wasn't able to apply there even after calling them and talking to them about it. It was off by like 1 month. Like when it comes to the med school process, rules are rules, and like schools unfortunately aren't willing to make exceptions most of the time because they have so many people applying that they could just kind of fill your spot with the next person. So make sure that I would say, find out when you plan on applying, take the exam when you're ready for it, and hopefully you could try to make it so that once you take the exam, you don't change your mind about applying, so that you don't push back that exam and risk it expiring down the line.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, Chris. I had a quick question about like the timing of med school and when you specialize in what kind of medicine you want to take part in. Also, if you have decided which specialty you want to go into.
Yeah, so I said at the beginning that I kind of went into medical school trying to do like preventative health stuff with the like going to cardiology and like focusing on preventative health stuff. But I kind of changed my mind a few months before actually starting medical school, just like from more experiences and like kind of realizing that some of the aspects of it weren't for me. And those are things you kind of figure out on the way through medical school. You have to decide what you're applying for the day you submit your residency application. Like I know people have changed what specialty they're planning on apply to like a month before the applications are due. Like they've built up an entire application for one specialty, but at the last moment, they're like, this isn't for me. And that's like the most important thing, is to find something that's for you. So making that realization at some point is important, but you really don't have to decide until the day you submit that application. I will say most people start figuring out as you're going, especially when you get past your core science classes and get like biochem for the 17th time out of the way. And you start taking like the system-based classes where you're learning more about each specialty. That's when people start kind of realizing like, hey, I really like the information in this class, or, you know, like this stuff really appeals to me. A lot of your lectures are given by physicians. So most people will go up to the doctors after the class and ask them to come shadow because they were interested in their lecture. So they'll go with them to shadow. I've seen people even like literally like lecture finishes, the doctors walking back to the hospital, and my classmates will like talk to them and walk with them on the way to the hospital and end up shadowing them as they enter the hospital. So it's really just exploring it in there. No one's going to guide you. No one like kind of holds your hand and guides you to something. There are like counseling sessions that you could get that help you decide a specialty, but it's kind of just like exploring it yourself. In terms of what I want to do now that I've changed my mind, I kind of realized at some point that like the medical specialties aren't for me, like cardiology and like oncology and things like that. I more so want to do stuff that's hands-on, and especially in the OR. So right now I'm looking at things like orthopedic surgery and urology. So all of the research I do are in those two fields, and then like other things like anesthesia, where I get to work with my hands and have a more relaxed lifestyle, or other things that I'm looking at also. But really, it is just like a journey of discovering it for yourself.
Thank you. Just to like follow up that really quick, do you have to get accepted when you put the application, or like everyone's like has like a guarantee kind of acceptance when you specify?
Oh, no. So the residency match system is its own beast. Just to quickly go over it, because I mean, the residency match is based off an algorithm that someone wrote like years back that won a Nobel Prize for like its complexity. But essentially what you do is you build an application for hopefully a specialty that you want to go to. You've done research, you've gotten letters of rec from doctors in that field or outside, just physicians that could speak to you as a student. And you apply for a specialty. You send out a bunch of applications. Residency programs will send you interviews, and you interview with them. And then what you do is, it's not the usual, like how med school is you interview, you get an acceptance or a rejection, and then you either accept that acceptance or not. It's like a job essentially, but residency doesn't work like that. What happens is you'll interview, and then at the end of all of your interviews, you'll submit a list where you rank all of the places that you interviewed at. So you say like, oh, like I interviewed at Cedars-Sinai, I like them the most, number one. Then I like UCLA second, then UCLA, then USC third. But you know, it might be cool to live in New York for a bit, so NYU fourth. You know, you list the programs out in terms of your preference, and then the schools also submit a list where they rank everyone that they've interviewed in terms of their preference. And the preference comes off of your interview, your research experience, and how many publications and abstracts and things like that you have, your test scores, which in the past was your step 1 score, which now will probably be step 2. And then they rank everyone based on that. All of those lists, all of the students' lists, and then all of the programs lists get put into a computer. That computer decides, looks through everyone's list and sees who likes who and matches you guys up like that. And once you get matched, that's it. Like, that's where you're going. You don't get a say after that. So if you match at the school at the top of your list, great, like that's where you're going. But if you match at the last school on your list, like you have no choice. There's no like, I want to redo and go somewhere else. So it's like very much more out of your hands and more random than like the med school application cycle.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I also have a question in regards to like the MCAT study schedule. Is there a specific way that you set yours up? Like basically making like a calendar and setting like which days like you focus on which subject, or did you use like an external program to like generate a schedule for you based on like a diagnostic?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like my study habits is that like I need to see things as often as possible. And that's why I study with like Anki now a lot, because it's like continuously testing me on all the things I've learned. So what I did during my MCAT studying was like my first read through. I did like a read through of like the Kaplan books, and then I outlined all the chapters for myself. Like I made like literally like 1-page cheat sheet outlines of every single chapter with as much important information as I could find, so that I didn't have to reread like 20 pages of information. And then I did that for every chapter through all of the books. And then what I would do was like every day I would take about, for the first like month or two, every single day I would take like 1 to 2 hours for 2 to 3 of the subjects, read like 2 to 3 of the chapters outlines. Like just test myself, like, do I know the information, like cover stuff up and test myself on it. Could I repeat back what I took notes on? Just to like kind of like constantly see things over and over again. So like I would go through the entirety of each subject's outlines on like an almost bi-weekly basis, so that I was just constantly seeing it over and over again. But I only did it for like an hour or 2 a day, so it wasn't like a huge time commitment like every time I did it. I did that for like 1 to 2 months, and then at that point I started doing like my practice problems. And then for like the next 3 to 4 months I was doing like question banks, like the AMC question banks, the section banks. I was doing like practice tests, like the AMC ones, Kaplan practice test, Next Step, which I think they changed the company's name, but they sold like a pack of 10 tests for a really good price. So I was just doing like literally as much practice I could get my hands on. And at the same time, based on what I was getting wrong in my practice tests, or like whatever I felt like I didn't know the best, I would keep reviewing those things in my outline. The stuff that I did know, I just kind of put to the side. I'm like, I know it, like let go of it. At some point when you know something, you don't want to just keep studying it because you're just studying something because it's comfortable to study. You want to study the things that you don't know. So I was trying to identify the things I didn't know and revisiting those outlines and going back over those chapters, if necessary, like reading the chapter again to get more context in my outline and like testing myself like that.
Okay, and then just, sorry. In regards to the outlines, I think I missed it. Did you make your own outline? Like you went through the chapter, you made an outline for like the important parts, or was it like the one in the back of the chapters?
No, so I would make my own just because like making the outline itself helped me study because I was identifying the important stuff. Because a lot of times, like even the Kaplan books and like all those books, even though they're essentially an outline of the courses, there's still like fluff in there that's like repetitive words and stuff. So I was literally just like outlining like most important words, most important definitions. Like if there was a definition in the book, I wouldn't write the verbatim definition they had. I would reword it to my own definition that I understood better so that it clicked with my brain. Because sometimes the way they word it doesn't click. So you want to kind of reword it for yourself. And making myself reword things and go through and like identify the important things myself kind of helped me like figure out what I really needed to study. And it solidified those topics too, because I'm like, okay, that's important. I need to know that. And then going back when I was like taking practice tests, I'm like, oh yes, I remember exactly when I outlined that thing. And like, I've seen the outline enough times that like, I could like picture it in my head at this point, seeing it every other week, you know? So I think like outlining yourself is best just to like make it best suited for you and not like their own outline of their outline essentially.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to know, obviously, medical school is difficult, but just as like a comparison or for people to understand like that level of difficulty or sort of how much, like if someone is not sure if they can do it, how different or dramatic is the difference between like, let's say the workload between undergrad and medical school? Like, again, obviously the curriculum are different and you're learning different things, and obviously it's higher levels of the same courses, but you know, being like third, fourth year in undergrad and doing those upper division classes, how much different is the workload?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's like an important one to consider too, because I would say like the information in med school, like conceptually isn't as difficult as some of the undergrad stuff. Because in undergrad, you're getting taught by PhDs and they're teaching about a class that is essentially like their entire life's work. They want to tell you every single detail about everything, and they think everything is important. So you have to know all of those little things. But in med school, that's kind of true for like the base science classes, like the biochems and things like that, genetics and like, you know, physiology. Like those classes are usually still taught by PhDs and they still might do that, but it's like not nearly as in depth because there's just like way more information. Like conceptually, it's not as challenging as I found like undergrad information. Like trying to understand anything in med school is not going to be nearly as hard as like understanding OChem. Like you're never going to have to wrap your mind around like two pretend molecules that you're drawing on a piece of paper interacting with each other. Like it's way more like, you know, person has been smoking for 25 years. They have high cholesterol. Because of that, they're going to develop heart disease. And because of the heart disease, this is going to, it's like way more intuitive to think about in med school. But like, there's just so much more of the information that like, it's way more time intensive. I'd say like I've had way fewer times just sitting down and struggling with a concept. Like in undergrad, there were times where I'd sit down for hours just trying to understand some concept. Whereas in med school, it's like if I get something wrong, it's because I literally just forgot it, because like I've been learning, like today, like I did 1,050 flashcards on information. Like I was bound to like have forgotten some of that because I'm trying to juggle that. And like the Onking deck is like, I think for step 1 info is like 32,000 cards or something long. Like you're trying to juggle all of that at the same time. So it's literally just like the sheer amount of stuff you're learning and not like the actual conceptual difficulty of it. And like just memorizing things like medication names and stuff like that could be like burdensome, but like sketchy and things like that make that way easier. So really it's just way more time intensive than anything else that you'll like ever do. Like I said, most people study on average like 4 to 8 hours. I know people that go up to like the 12 hours a day, like in psychotic fashion, but it's just like keeping up with all of that information is a challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was actually a really great answer. Because I feel like a lot of like these upper div classes that we end up taking are a lot of just the professors like research projects, and they like teach it to us rather than actual material. So like I get the course load is more difficult, but it's like a different style of learning.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like some of the stuff that the PhDs think is like absolutely necessary for you to know, or else you'll never be able to walk around society and act like a normal person without knowing about this one random molecule they discovered in their lab. It's just like wild sometimes. And like very rarely that'll happen in med school, where like you need to know something to like that level of conceptual understanding, but it's really just like the sheer amount of it. And I just kind of want to emphasize that like the time commitment in medical school is like insane. I just want like people to consider that like for 2 years in preclinicals, you're going to be studying like upwards of 8 to 10 hours a day. During your rotations, I didn't go into like the rotation life because I haven't like actually gone through it yet, but I have like an understanding. For rotations, you're working in the hospital a minimum of 40 hours a week, upwards of like 80 hours a week during like surgical or like OB-GYN rotations. On top of that, you're also studying outside of the time you're in the hospital because you have a shelf exam at the end of every single rotation. So like sometimes you will essentially like in rotation years have time for nothing, but that's like 3rd year. And then 4th year is like super customizable to like what you want to do and like what you want your schedule to look like. But I do want to like emphasize that because some people have an idea of how they want their life to go in terms of personal life, and sometimes medical school could be a challenge to that. I think a lot of people talk about it in terms of women and starting families, but like it's the same thing for guys too. Like to guys, like don't like consider that too. Everyone consider like your time commitment, and like going into residency, you're going to be working like 60 hours usually at the minimum a week. Think about like how you plan your like life ongoing and what you want to do, and like family wise, starting families, things like that, because that's your actual life. This is a career and that's your life. So like come up with some priorities of what you want to do. Like for me, I'm honestly, I'm pretty good with like juggling my personal life with my work life, but I know some people are like prone to letting their work life take over, and it could be super destructive, especially when you have something like medical school and residency where like if you want to, you can spend that time like really getting lost in your work and getting lost and losing sight of what's really important. So take these things into consideration. Not to discourage anyone, because medicine is an amazing field, and I truly believe that there is no other field. Like the things I've seen happen in hospitals are insane. Like I've seen people like come back to life in front of my like very own eyes. Like someone is dead and then they jump out of their bed like alive because of what a physician has done for them. Like there's no more rewarding career out there, in my humble opinion. And there's nothing that I think could be more satisfying for someone that wants to go into medicine than practicing medicine. There are a lot of people that don't choose medical school, even though they want to. And later down the line, you'll start hearing those people say, I should have gone to medical school. And you'll see them in your medical school classes too, because I have people as old as like 39 years old that are starting medical school now, because down the line, they realize that like it was their true calling and that's what they wanted to do. But if at any point you see yourself pursuing medicine for something like your family wants you to do it, and your family thinks you should do it, like start thinking about like what going to medicine like really entails and like what commitment it really is.
Hi, I have a quick question about research as an undergraduate. So I've heard I've read a lot of places that research is like, oh, only do it if it really interests you, like don't do it if it's not really your thing. And I've heard other people say, no, research is like you have to do it. If you don't do it, then you probably won't get into like a good medical school. But recently I've also been hearing like it's overrated. Like, I don't know, what are your thoughts of research? Like, do medical schools really emphasize it, or should I spend more time on like having a really good clinical experience?
Clinical experience is like most important, like by far and away. Obviously, like some people do go to medical school and then just pursue careers in research. Like there are a lot of MDs that just become scientists and don't practice, but like schools are accepting you to become a clinician one day. So like clinical experience reigns supreme over everything else. That said, I would never say that like research isn't valuable, especially like I was saying, like those top 20 schools, like the super like research heavy facilities. You guys could get, I forget what it's called. There's like some AMC offers this like subscription that's like $50 a year or something, where they give you stats on the acceptances of each school. So it'll tell you like accepted average GPAs, average accepted MCATs for each school, like number of students in state, out of state, like things like that, important things for like choosing medical schools. They'll also list out what percentage of their students had certain activities. So it'll be like clinical volunteering, non-clinical volunteering, research, other clinical experience. And it'll tell you like what percent of students have what. I think at most schools, like I want to say like 60% or so of students have like some research experience, just because like people do get into like the mindset of like, oh, like I've heard you need to do research, so I did research, blah blah. But like I said, like kind of like meaningless research isn't that important because you just kind of did something to check a box. But if you could actually find like a lab that you're interested in, or like a lab that you could be productive in and get like publications and abstracts and things like that, that's super helpful, especially for those top 20 schools. Because once you get to like the Stanfords, the UCSFs, UCLA, USC, those top research schools, that like percentage of the class that has research on their application goes up to like the 90s. Like it's like almost an expectation at those schools. Most schools aren't expecting you to have research. Having research obviously helps, but it's like not an expectation at those schools. But at the research heavy facilities, it is like important to them, because they kind of want to make sure that most of their med students do get into research. But like, again, like I said, I had like very minimal research experience. Like I did have like a low level of research experience. I wouldn't say like I didn't have any publications, no abstracts, nothing like that. I just spent some time in a lab. I got an interview at USC. USC isn't as big on research as like the other like big schools, but like they like do favor things like volunteering in like underserved communities and things like that. And then I got 3 other interviews at other schools, because I mean, most schools don't really expect you to be like a Nobel Prize winning research scientist already. And like I said, like it won't really affect your ability to get research in medical school either, because I had very little experience. And right now I am more free labor to the orthopedic and urologic surgery departments than they probably would have ever hoped for.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So I'm taking my MCAT in January, and I've been studying for a long time now, and I'm feeling myself get burnt out and somewhat discouraged. So I'm like curious as to how you prevent that from happening to yourself in medical school, considering how much work you have.
You have to make sure like the priorities you have in like your personal life and make sure that you're keeping up those priorities and taking care of yourself. Uh, things like making sure you get your workouts in, because like we started even learning about like, neurotransmitter releases and exercise and like the way they relieve stress and like how eating and stuff affects stress levels, how like maintaining good social connections, all these things all play into each other. There's like something called like the seven something of well-being, the 7 like essentials of well-being, something like that, where it just kind of like lists out a bunch of things that you kind of almost everyone needs to maintain like a healthy outlook on life and like a healthy relationship with themselves. Things that range from like spirituality.
Listen to the new song, Weekend song. Oh yeah, you like it? Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, it's like things like spirituality, not necessarily like religious stuff, but like just spirituality, like exercise, I think nutrition, relationships with other people, all these things that like you think are like important to being a normal person are important to not burning out when you're trying to not be a normal person as like a student either. Like keeping up all these things is important for like your own well-being and for your mental health. So I'd say like make sure to plan out time for those. When it gets time to like, I have a test in 3 days, I need to study. Obviously at those times you kind of cut out some of the things and you have to make sacrifices to prep. But other than that, it's about like maintaining a healthy balance and making sure that above all else, before you're a pre-medical student, you are just a human being and taking care of those needs.
Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, if not, then we could just end there. Thank you, Chris, for coming and taking the time to speak to everyone. And thank you everyone for joining. We really hope you enjoyed it and got a lot from this.
And my email is here. So if anyone has any questions, even if I'm going to be your med student mentor or something like that, reach out. I can help you along this way too. Like one of my favorite things about going down these paths is like learning and making mistakes for myself. So I could try to at least help make it easier for someone else. So please like feel free to email me. I respond super fast to my emails. Like reach out with any questions, concerns. Like if you ever even want to just hop on a Zoom call and start talking about like your application or like your thoughts about going into medicine, anything like that, like I'm always here. So just reach out. All right. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.